Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us on today's panel about the future of mobility. I'm really excited to host this panel with two great experts on the scene. So Gabriele, who is from the student group who participated in the SpaceX Challenge in California and got awarded there actually for preparing a prototype of the Hyperloop pod, and Holger Weiss, who is CEO of the German Auto Labs, so who's really building an IoT co-pilot for cars, revolutionizing the way we drive. So I think this is super interesting, especially as I'm personally convinced the mobility sector is going to be one of those areas where we will look back in like 15 years and think, wow, that was kind of weird how we used to get from A to B like 15 years back. So to kick it off, I would actually like to start in the present and ask you two, how did you get to this venue, Holger?
This morning, by car. And I drove a car, a self-driven car, my car.
And you?
Yeah, I came yesterday from Munich, so our offices are in Munich, and we came yesterday in Munich by plane. So yeah, it took us a couple of hours to get here, so the flight itself is quite short, but getting to the airport and then from the airport to Berlin to the hotel, that takes some time.
Yeah, and I mean, these are two travel forms that I guess all of us, like we have experienced them hundreds, thousands, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of times to travel either by car or by plane. Gabriele, what you are working on is actually a technology that goes to like spheres that we can't test today. So can you explain a bit about the Hyperloop project, the idea behind it, and also why you have decided to join this student group?
Okay, so the Hyperloop concept was proposed back in 2013 by Elon Musk. And the idea is to combine the advantages of a train and a plane. So the main advantage of a train is that it moves on the ground, so it's actually quite easy compared to a plane. And the advantage of a plane is obviously it can go way faster. So one of the reasons why a plane can go that fast is it moves in a region where the air pressure is relatively low, so it can move quite fast. So what you're trying to do with the Hyperloop is combine these two technologies. And the idea there is you build a long tube, you bring a long tube and then you take the air out of the tube, or at least partially, and due to the fact that you have very little air inside the tube, you can move way faster. And so inside this tube we will then have small pods, capsules called pods, that can move up to, well, we usually say the speed of sound, so up to 1,200 kilometers per hour, and connect places quite fast. So that was the idea that Elon Musk proposed in 2013. And then in 2015, he decided, together with his company SpaceX, to organize a competition for students or group worldwide to work on the technology. And then back then, a project started at the TU Munich as well for the first Hyperloop competition that took place in January 2017. And so the project started with, at the beginning, 7 students, and then later on 30 students. And now there is a second group working for a second competition now in August. And we are, again, around 30 students working on that. And I joined actually directly the second group and not the first group back in October. I heard about the group. I wanted to work to help at least to improve the technology in that field. And the project there was the perfect opportunity to do that.
Wow, that sounds really cool, to be honest. Like, and what are the challenges that you're like mainly working on at the moment from, I don't know, a technical perspective as well as from a business model perspective?
Well, what we are mainly working on the technology. So the main issues with the technology are levitation and propulsion. So the idea is to even further reduce drag when the capsule is moving through the tube. You need to levitate, so to even reduce the friction to the ground. And then at the same time, if you want to go to 1,200 kilometers per hour, you really need to have efficient propulsion system to actually go there. So that's actually the two systems where lots of work needs to be done to actually improve the technology in that direction. There is also obviously the issue with the business model, but that's actually not our focus since we are mostly focused on working really on improving the technology.
I think it's really interesting because your technology really seems like to be a bit out of space. It's really like the sound of the future somehow, while what you are doing, Holger, is really much more something that seems so much closer to where we actually stand. So you're building like an IoT co-pilot for driving. Like, how did you come up with this idea? And also, as a second question, does this somehow mean you don't believe that will have self-driving cars very soon?
Okay. 2 questions, enough for 1 hour answer. I try to keep it short. So,
keep it short, yeah.
Exactly. So one thing that you're touching, and I like that very much, is indeed that we're trying to build something for today. And the automotive, I mean, similar to, trains and trail racks, etc. I mean, that's even something different. But the automotive industry is still an industry that is building fast things very slow. Right? So on average, the planning cycle for a car is 5 to 7 years, and then they produce it 7 years or 10 years, and so, I mean, this is what it is. We talk about 15 to 17 years. Yeah. And that means a little bit, and I'm just coming back from the Valley. I was 10 days in the Valley, and in the Valley, Tesla really is the new Golf, right? I mean, if you're there at the red traffic light in your little Nissan rental car as a start-upper, there are sometimes only Teslas around you. And if you're also talking there to people, technology people and investors, they really believe that the world will drive autonomous in 4 years from now, right? Just because Tesla is calling something an autopilot, what is not an autopilot, but they can do this because it's a marketing term. So now coming back to reality. The average car in Germany is about 9.5, 10 years old, which actually means that the fleet outside there, and there are 47 million cars out on Germany streets. There are 220 million in the US. 2/3 of that fleet will still be around in 10 years. Do the math. Unless we will have, let's say, more Chinese type of regulatory possibilities from a political point of view, this will not change so much. So, and now comes the second question, because all of you guys driving so old cars, who's using the smartphone while driving? Come on, be honest. Who's using the smartphone while driving a car? Texting, navigation, etc. I don't see your faces. So 85% of people doing that, constantly or very often. And that leads to a situation that the first time in 25 years, the death casualties on US highways is going up again. And the NHTSA, that's the North American Traffic Association, they call it the Snapchat effect. So the German Minister of Transport is just about to ban phone usage completely from cars. And that's all about because we are not autonomous driving. And it will take a while. And this fundamental glitch is something that we try to bridge at the moment, and we're building this intelligent co-pilot. Chris actually is the name, and it's an easy to install aftermarket solution that fits in every car easily, and it actually talks to you and learns about your behavior and makes you connecting with your digital life while driving.
What is Chris actually doing for you when you drive the car?
Chris actually is understanding when there's a message coming in, and now I let my phone outside there. Today you guys all going to the office like that, right? You're browsing the emails while driving, or your WhatsApp, or your Facebook, or I don't know. So that's something that Chris actually will do for you. We'll say there's a new email, and it's from whatever, Gabriele, and it's about the panel, and then I could say, okay, please reply all set and fine, and I'm looking forward. But while driving a car, and that's something that people sometimes telling us, but I have Siri or I have Alexa, right? But the fundamental difference between being in an environment like this one or a home environment where you have stable Wi-Fi and DSL and everything happens in parallel. I mean, at home, come on, you could easily handle 5 different screens, 24 messages per second. You can dance naked in front of your TV and everything would be fine unless your neighbor would have a drone. But in a car, you're driving 140 kilometers per hour with 1.5 tons, right? And that's something different. And now what's going to happen? You're approaching this highway exit, right? Autobahnausfahrt. And you're listening to your Google Maps or your Here Maps or your Apple Maps. So. And then you're 40 meters in front of that exit, right? And in the very moment you expect the navigation command to come because it's one of these double exits and so on, there's a WhatsApp coming in. And what is happening? It's overruling the navigation command, so you don't understand the navigation command. You miss the highway exit, Right? In the worst case, you brake and push back and creating an accident. In the better case, you have maybe a detour of a couple of kilometers. And then you're looking at the WhatsApp. It's a smiley from your best friend. And you say, I mean, how that? And that's because we need in a car while moving, also in a Hyperloop. And we can talk about that because it's not only what we're building for now for the time without autonomous driving cars. You need, while being mobile, information and sequences because you're leaving a place and you're approaching a place, right?
Gabriele, would you actually agree that you also think like until like the whole technology of self-driving cars and so on becomes really relevant for us, there are like decades left, or how do you see the situation?
Well, I mean, often, yeah, the people of the Valley, for example, and like Elon Musk as a good example, they always think technology is easy and it will be adopted quite quickly.
It's good that they think that way.
Yeah, it's good that they think that way. That we could.
I don't question
that's good. But on the other way, yeah, the problem you were talking about, and also with the Hyperloop. So there are expectations of having a Hyperloop like in a couple of years, and it might be manageable, but it will take time to actually improve the technology, then optimize it, then make it stable technology, and then really have it worldwide and spread it around the world.
Before the first Hyperloop is live, Elon Musk will have tunneled all LA,
all LA
with his boring company.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to see Elon Musk coming now in the boring industry. That always sounds like
boring.com. It's a great URL.
He chose the name like wisely. That's a good name. No. But yeah, so we'll see how that develops. That's actually also interesting because in principle, tunnels would be great for the Hyperloop if we could.
Whenever I speak with someone from the Valley, I'm always surprised because like everyone is always saying like, you know, you Germans, you just don't dream big enough. Yeah, you have all these fantastic car companies. Yeah, you build up BMW, you build up Mercedes.
And
everyone used to love it, but now the time for hardware perfectionism is over. How do you see that?
No, they're absolutely right. But what they usually underestimate, again, it's good that they do that because otherwise you would not drive this technology so fast and on that pace. But a lot of people in German automotive industry, and don't forget, 60% of the profit of Germany is depending directly or indirectly from automotive. So this is a dominant industry in this country. A lot of people haven't really realized what's going on, and we will see in a not too far away time that 60, 70, 80% of the value contribution of a car comes from software, right? On the other side, and that is also important to mention, is that especially if you see the German car makers, and I know some of them, and I know suppliers like Bosch and Continental, etc., it's not that they are only in hardware, right? I mean, these guys have tens of thousands of developers. It's just that it's not looking like building the next Tesla, etc., but building the underneath foundation. So it's half-half.
It kind of goes into the same direction. What is also something I have always wondered is also when you have finally such a new technology as, for instance, I don't know, the Hyperloop or self-driving cars, like how hard is it actually to get people to use them? Because if you think about the transportation methods we have today, it's not something new. So there was very few disruption taking place. So cars, I don't know, planes, trains, it's nothing new. So I read a study that, for instance, like in America, so the study was conducted by the American automotive industry, that less than 40% of the people that were asked in the study agreed that they would like automated features in their cars, like not even parking features and so on. So
yeah, but that's a little bit like asking people, would you like to spend vacation on the moon? If you never did it, it's very difficult to answer that. And that is demand creation and demand fulfillment, and autonomous driving will create a lot of demand doing that. I would love to do this in the morning coming here, just calling my autonomous cab for no money because transportation will be very cheap in future, and just coming here and reading my emails whatsoever, right? And that's one thing. The other thing is indeed, and I think talking about technology, user behavior is not to underestimate, and people have to accept this. And that's something, I mean, it's not about bashing Europe versus the US, etc., right? But it's more that I think before we will have really a wide, open spirit in the society for autonomous driving things, it will take bit longer than in the US. And my example is always, if you walk a US airport and you go to the gates and you look to the waiting people and then check the people above 60, right? They all have a wearable, they're all reading the books on tablets and on other technical stuff, and then do the same in Stuttgart, München, or Karlsruhe, and it looks different. So there is a higher level of adoption, but I agree with you, it will take a lot of time and persuasion.
Do you think like even more for a technology that is like still so far away than the Hyperloop, or?
Well, that's the thing. You need to get the people to trust the technology, right? So with autonomous driving, you obviously have that problem that people should also trust the car to do everything for you and just stand there and have a nice ride, which would be great, but then you really need to trust your car. And with the Hyperloop, you actually have the same problem or the same issue. In principle, you need to trust the system you're in to really transport you at 1,200 kilometers per hour and be safe. And that's the one thing we need to focus about when talking about Hyperloop. One of the reasons I think it will take slightly more time than some are planning is really you want to make sure that your system is completely safe before you send people with that. So first of all, we will definitely start with cargo transport.
Honestly, yeah, I mean, start with cargo and dogs. Not dogs, I like dogs.
Why dogs, yeah.
But that's something, I mean, when the first cars came in, I don't know, late 19th century, then people really had the feeling that 30 kilometers per hour is a death-facing type of speed, right? And I honestly do not know if people would not rather accept something like, see, a Hyperloop it's a tube, but I mean, people also using the tunnel under the channel, right, to England, and that's something you have hundreds of thousands of millions of tons of water, and they trust this technology, but you cannot go wrong. Right, so
that's a very good thing about the Hyperloop.
I mean, honestly, I mean, leaving my life to a machine and there's a free floating. I mean, there are also different phases in getting autonomous. One thing is if you're going a highway lane just on the right side and you're dogging like a train, and that's something different. But if before all this will be free floating, right? And the CEO of ZF, Dr. Sommer, he once said, we only will have autonomous traffic the day we will have autonomous deers, right? Because there will be still animals jumping into cars, etc. So
maybe we can do it like a super quick check with the audience. Like, raise your hand if you would be totally up for testing the Hyperloop. Yeah.
That's
okay.
Great.
You know it's a tech conference, yeah?
Exactly.
Yeah, well, but it's still great for us to know that so many people are looking forward to riding a pod.
My impression is also somehow that like the innovation is really driven like by big companies today. You know, like for instance, when you look at self-driving cars and so on, it's driven by Uber, it's driven by Google, it's even driven by like the automotive industry. So how can startup like yours contribute, and how is like the feedback that you get when you, for instance, speak to like the big old players in the industry?
Coming to the next point, which differs the US and Europe, technology, right, and future needs a lot of money. A lot of money. And that is something that's indeed difficult to raise in Europe. In the US at the moment, I mean, and I would contradict, I mean, the money has to come, and somehow the money is there with VCs, etc. And ever since this first startup in autonomous driving, Cruise was sold for $1 billion to General Motors, there is a kind of a gold rush, a new gold rush. And there are, I would guess, something like 40 to 60 stealth mode hidden teams in the valley working at the moment at autonomous driving cars. And they are all startups, right? And of course, someone like Google with Waymo, etc., they are front runner, and BMW is a front runner, and all of these guys, because you need the money. But I think it's for entrepreneurs in automotive, it's the best time ever since we replaced the horses against the engine.
And for the Hyperloop, I mean, I know when we talked, like yesterday, you mentioned that like the whole organization is also structured like probably differently than most people would think. So
what's interesting about the Hyperloop is that when the concept was presented, no big company actually started working on that, but lots of, let's say, smaller companies started, which in the meantime are quite big companies as well. But still no giant of the industry has started working on that yet. So the first company was Hyperloop Transportation Technology, and then later on Hyperloop One. They really started from scratch, working really just on the Hyperloop. So in the Hyperloop scene, you really have very new companies working on that.
You guys should apply with this Deutsche Bahn accelerator. Beyond 1435 was not around when
that's interesting. Yeah, I'll talk to the guys later. Yeah. So in the Hyperloop thing, and also what's also interesting is the first company that actually started Hyperloop Transportation Technologies is also not built like a traditional company, let's say. So the idea is always for the Hyperloop to be an open concept and for everybody to work on the technologies. That's also what we as students are doing. And also the first Hyperloop company is really spread around the world. So people are working from home on the technologies spread around the world, and then the concept is coming together in some places where our bigger teams building up, but still the company is very open. So it's like a very new concept, and also a new concept for companies for smaller companies to work with.
You mentioned the accelerator of Deutsche Bahn. There are like different transportation methods that we just spoke about. Like we spoke about cars, we spoke about self-driving cars, we spoke about the Hyperloop. Like, how do you see the future of trains, of long-distance buses, of national flights, and so on? How will they change?
Well, the good thing about the Hyperloop, I mean, what's sometimes not understood is that the Hyperloop is not a solution for every problem, right? Hyperloop is a solution for a I wouldn't say specific problem, but for a range between where a train is the optimal transportation system, let's say for public transportation, and a plane. So if you have a train and you want to go from Munich to Berlin, it will take you 6 hours, I think, or maybe now it's reduced to 4. It's
since
reduced
the
to
weekend.
4. Since the weekend it's 4. So we're making progress there, but still a train needs, like, say, 4 hours. It's still quite a lot. I mean, with a plane yesterday, the flight took less than an hour, really, just the flight. But if you think about an airplane, the problem with the airplane is in an hour flight, everything is almost takeoff and landing. And that's not where the plane is optimized for. The plane is optimized for traveling at high altitudes with high speeds. That's where the plane performs best. So you have really this range between where a train is fast enough to get you there quickly, and a plane is way faster actually than the train, but it's not really optimized. In that range, the Hyperloop would be a good solution. If you start to look at longer distances where, like, over the Atlantic, that wouldn't make sense to build a tube over the Atlantic. I mean, that would be a way too big. Yeah. I mean, that would take so much money, then a plane would be easier.
It's also, I mean, yes, but the Hyperloop will not go to a Klein-Wupperfeld. So, I mean, actually, as long as people not all living in metropolitan areas where in the future a lot of people will live, and then it looks different. But I mean, that's the thing that we see, right? That especially the rural areas don't benefit from any of those big projects, but something like autonomous driving shuttles or on-demand Anrufbus, right? On-demand buses, shuttles, etc. They can do a great job there, right? Yeah. Bringing older people to seeing the doctor and things like that.
That's true. I mean, what would be great is to get to combine really these technologies. So one of the ideas also, I mean, if you have a Hyperloop, you still won't be able to get home with the Hyperloop. I mean, your Hyperloop can only bring you to the main station of a city. And then we have already seen concept where you really try to combine the Hyperloop pod with an autonomous driving car.
Of course.
And for the last mile problem, that would be a great solution.
Absolutely.
So it will be really interesting to really try to combine this technology into a whole package.
Or we just mount our people mover drone at the Hyperloop port, right? I mean, there are a couple of drone companies at the moment testing people moving, right? Yeah. And that was the question I had to Elon Musk if I ever would meet him. Do you really believe that people go in tunnels or they go in the air? Because he's the one who says it will not be possible to move people on a big volume through the air.
Well, I actually, was like a month ago, he gave an interview and actually explained why I think that's not the case. And it's also back to the trust problem. If you have lots of things flying around, it's scary, right? I mean, flying cars.
I mean, someone who's calling an autopilot and puts it in a Tesla, I mean,
Okay.
give me a break.
Yeah, okay.
I mean,
There's a point there.
This guy doesn't have a trust problem.
He's not having the trust problem. The thing is the people are around. So the people are not yet trusting a Tesla, and not everybody at least. And the same thing would be if you start having flying cars over your head. Yeah. Do you really trust them?
I have one very last question for you, and it's kind of an intense question, so take a moment to think about it. But before we jump into a short Q&A session with the audience, so if you have any questions already, think about it. I would ask both of you to draw me a vision of the future that you see in 25 years. Like, how do we get from A to B? How do we live? What's different to 2015? Go for it.
Should I start?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, let's say 2025, 2030, way more people will live in metropolitan areas than they do today. And we have to see that there are different areas in the world. We will have developed areas, we will have still emerging areas, and we will have poor areas. And these cities will look very different. So one thing that will be new to us, or not new, but it will be an element, is that we will get vertical transportation. So the buildings will get higher and higher, and we will have something like intersections in those buildings where you go from vertical, when you're coming from the 250th floor, right? And then you enter the highway direct. So in cities, there will be almost no private car ownership. There will be dedicated private car ownership to do somewhere outside, like you're riding a horse today on the weekend. You might ride your car on a special course. And transportation will be highly regulated in a sense that there will be one or two standards to do that, and will be a mixture of very structured type of public transport, meaning that it really goes by the schedule, and free-floating autonomous driving vehicles, and as that ownership will be less and it will be very cheap.
Yeah. That's actually what I was going to talk about. I think the future of mobility is really, if you want to improve even further, you, for once, as I said before, need to combine different concepts, and we are seeing more and more concepts like Hyperloop, like flying cars, coming together, and you really have to try to optimize and put them together, like the Hyperloop with autonomous driving for the last mile, something like that. That would be a great solution for improving transportation by a lot. So I think that would be the great thing that we will see in the next years coming.
And do you think there's something left to come up where we have no idea yet that it will arrive? Or do you just feel like everything is kind of already kick-started somehow?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to say. I mean, before 2013, yeah, there was similar concept to the Hyperloop, but still nobody was thinking about bringing them up again, high-speed transportation system like we've seen before. So we'll see. I think, and also the moment you start really thinking about putting things together, you might recognize you have a missing piece, and then something might come up in that missing piece.
Isn't there a company working at an elevator to the moon? I think there is a company.
Space elevator, yeah.
Space elevator.
Yeah.
See, maybe we do moon travel with an elevator.
Well, that would be the next step.
I think
Elfter Stock Weltraumforschung.
Yeah. I think that's a very, very good future vision to kind of come to an end now, although I could keep on chatting with you guys forever. I would really like to open up for the audience if there are any questions, either for Holger or Gabriele or whatever. So if you have any questions, raise your hand. I think there is a mic.
It's too hot.
Any questions? Yeah, that gentleman in the first row.
Hey, what makes you think that people will live mostly in metropolitan areas? Like if autonomous driving will be there, if Hyperloop is there, I myself, I would be living, I don't know, somewhere in Bavaria in the mountains where it's beautiful because I can, while sleeping, go to the next town. So what would be your hypothesis on how real estate prices would sort of change when autonomous driving is there and it's super cheap?
I mean, with respect to real estate prices, there might be impact because certain areas are easier to reach. On the other side, I don't know why that should be easier than today, because fundamentally mobility still will be there. Maybe with a people mover drone that you start to build houses somewhere in the mountains in areas you couldn't reach, that might be a point. No, I mean, there's a general trend globally into bigger metropolitan areas. And in parts, it's something that is commercially driven, right? That people just go there where work is, and they go there where the supply is, and so on. But I don't say that people will not enjoy to live in the countryside. Absolutely not, right? But and as I said, there will be different areas, and I would agree that in a more developed Western world or developed Asian world, you will still see a very developed countryside, whereas in other areas, it will be there where the cities are.
Any further questions? No? Last chance? In the very last row.
Thanks. Oh, hey. So you guys talked a lot about autonomous driving. So when do you think this will kick in, that people will really use it for a daily commute? So because I'm asking this because I also come back from traveling to from the valley today, and there are a lot of companies who draw the vision that it's going to be kicking in within the next few years. And then this morning I read a study that it might kick in 2040. So they're like, yeah, right. So what do you guys think about that?
So I like to say it will come way faster than most of the people expect, and it will take way longer than some people try to tell us. So you will, I mean, fundamentally, if you buy today a high-class car, call it a 5 Series BMW or Q5 Audi or Tesla, etc., there is a level of autonomy, autonomous driving, right? It's cruise control originally, but you could drive with your Q5 or with your 5 Series today with 200 kilometers per hour, completely hands-free, and at the end of a traffic jam, it will break down and nothing would happen to you. That's reality. And I wrote a blog article a couple of months ago where I said it's not about the technology. The technology is a solved issue. So I think we will see very soon more of that, and we will see public transport to start with going extremely slow. That's a little bit this safety thing. In Japan, there's a company driving autonomous driving bus with 70 kilometers per hour. I mean, that's a thumbs up. That's not what we will see. But before we will really have free floating, and remember what I said before, simply by the economy of scale, how these cars should be produced, and also what we just said, the adoption of those services, it will be 2030. I always said 2030, 35, and when I read this article this morning, I said, okay, someone else has the same opinion.
There are two more questions over here, and then I think we have to come to an end, actually. So
they were so shy all the time. Now they're coming. No.
I tried to be very loud. Oh, now it's working. Okay, good. I was wondering maybe that if there's a country like China who has a lot of power from the State Department, who can just push their people to do something to, I don't know, from now on we have 20% self-driving cars in Beijing. Do you think that this might have an impact in the maybe more near future?
Big time, big time. I don't know who of you actually has observed this in Beijing. About 3 years ago, the city government of Beijing decided that in the inner circle, there are the 6 rings, and in the inner circle, there were only electric scooters allowed. And it was a declaration by the city municipality, and owners of scooters had 3 months' time to change. And that's something that would not be possible here, luckily, and not in the US and elsewhere. But of course, this drives innovation. Right, and that is, I mean, if Germany decides to drop nuclear power, right, then innovation will be driven in the sense of alternative energy, etc. So if China decides to say, okay, we're all driving autonomous because there's a shit here in Beijing, and it is, and in all these other cities you never heard about, then it will drive a lot of innovation, and it will that will impact technology a lot.
Very last question.
Okay, I've got quite a difficult one for you guys. We know that the technology is here and that's not the problem for this to come to the broad spectrum of the society. But how will we as a society and as countries cope with the legal and ethical challenges that come when it comes to who is liable? who do we need to speak to? Who do we need to convince to push this agenda forward? Which is, in my opinion, a much bigger problem when we think about these issues.
Yeah, well, I think for the Hyperloop, the idea is, in principle, what we need to prove with the technology, it's really that it makes sense to build the Hyperloop. I think that's the main issue. So with the Hyperloop, we're trying to implement the technology, and as you said, the technology is not the biggest issue there. What's the biggest issue there is then to actually get states or countries or big companies in some way to really build the infrastructure for that. And that is something that mostly depends on the company that's behind it and his business model, but it's also very dependent on whether the Hyperloop makes sense. So in the moment the Hyperloop would prove himself to be a great solution and people would get enthusiastic about that, then we would definitely see everything moving in that direction due to the fact that it makes sense and improves people's lives.
I think we could probably even do a panel discussion just about the points that you just mentioned in your question, because it's really interesting. But yeah, time has come to an end. So thank everyone for being here, for joining us, and I hope you have a great conference. Thanks, HEUREKA. Thanks, Gabriele, and enjoy.
Thank you.